Hello, I'm Humphrey. This is our presentation on the paper we did, which is Don't Trust Your Profiler, an empirical study on accuracy and precision of Java profilers. I did this work with Octave, Sophie, and Stefan, and myself, obviously. So let's get started. Why don't we trust profilers? In our work, we have to make use of benchmarks quite a lot, and we're interested in how the performance of those benchmarks actually breaks down. What method do you spend the most amount of time in? And so we ran a profiler. This is for the Delta Blue benchmark, which is quite well known. And that's what we got back, and it's just telling you there that 11% of the time was spent in dictionary.getBucket, and then so on for the rest of the methods. Why we were suspicious is because we have a knowledge of the code, we actually suspect vector.forEach should be the most important method, the method that takes up the most amount of time. So instead of just believing the profiler, we actually ran it again. This is what we got. As you can see, the first thing is dictionary.getBucket does not appear in the second run at all. Its percentage of runtime is so low, it's below the top 5. Something else you might notice is vector4each is now suddenly the most important method on the second run. So who do you believe? And that was the inspiration for this paper. So what were some of our research questions? Do profilers have consistent self-precision? That is, if you run a profiler multiple times, do you get the same result? Do multiple profilers agree? If we ran different profilers against each other on the same benchmark, is the result similar? And finally, are profilers more precise when safe bias is removed? Previous work has identified safepoint bias as a problem in Java profilers, and now profilers now taken into consideration in their design safepoint bias to help reduce it, and we want to know, has profilers got better since then? What will we actually show? We'll show the average precision of 6 Java profilers, all samplers. We will show the worst case scenarios where there is actually disagreement from run to run, and the disagreement between the different Java profilers we tested. And finally, we'll show the average overhead of our Java profilers. So what is a profiler? A profiler is a tool that helps you understand what the computer was doing when the program was executed. It collects lots of information. It can vary from profiler to profiler. You can have CPU, GPU, and memory metrics, for example. Profilers are not just a niche tool used by a few developers. There's some quite famous examples. AMD has CodeXL and UProfs for their GPUs and CPUs. Intel has vTune, which allows you to profile lots and lots of languages on Intel hardware, and very recently, now on some features available on AMD processors. There's Valgrind, which is a well-known profiler for memory debugging and memory leak detection. And then there's also Amazon Code Guru, for example, which uses machine learning to try and find expensive and slow pieces of code. Because we're only testing sampling profilers, we're only going to go into actually how a sampler works. CPU sampling is the process of periodically interrupting the CPU to see what the current state of the hardware is. The types of things you may collect may be stack traces, instruction points, or memory usages. After that, you should have enough samples to sort of build an image of what did the program do during the execution. These outputs are then sort of turned into something more meaningful. Almost all profilers give you some sort of console output like we saw at the beginning, where you just get a list of the methods and the percentage runtime. There's also flame graphs, which sort of try to visualize stack traces, where each block is a method, and then the peaks and the mountains are the actual trace of all the method calls. There's also a hierarchical view where you can get the most important methods at the top, and then it gives you the percentage and the amount of time it took. Problems with profilers. There has been some previous work on Java profilers. The main paper that influenced this work was evaluating accuracy of Java profilers. They investigated the accuracy of 4 Java profilers, and their evaluation showed that there was a disagreement between them. This is their figure 4. It's very difficult to see. They had, for here, this is a Jython benchmark, and out of their 4 profilers, one of them, your kit, decided that it was 35% of the runtime, while the others decided it was 22%. Not decided, but discovered. And they found lots of examples where profilers would just disagree with each other. What's the possible reasons for this? They identified safepoint bias. It's not required to know what safepoint bias is for our paper, but it's the Java garbage collection has safepoints, and this actually restricts where stacks can be sampled. And therefore, the program there isn't an equal chance that the program can be sampled and at all points, which therefore breaks the point of sampling, where it should be an equal amount of probability across the program. What's the differences between our 2 papers? They tested 4 profilers, we tested 6. We do share 2 similar profilers, JProfile and your kit, because they're actually the maintained ones, and the other 2 they tested are no longer maintained. They used the Decapo benchmark suite, whereas we will use the RFastJet suite. There's also a big problem of time. Theirs is over 13 years old, and when they identified safepoint bias, incorporating strategies to reduce safepoint bias was not in profilers' designs at the time. So we want to know, 13 years on, has the situation got any better? Is safepoint bias, has the precision issues caused by safepoint bias got any better as well? There are some other problems with profilers. Overhead, obviously, the act of interrupting the CPU will incur overhead. Samplers generally have much less overhead than instrumentation, but they still cause some. There's also the overhead observer effect problem. Whether it be probes or the sampling, this added overhead is going to incur a change in the program's execution. Small amounts, large amounts of overhead can cause a different optimization choice by the compiler, and therefore the program is different from if it was run without a profiler attached. These were our 6 chosen profilers. Async, Honest Profiler, and Java Flight Recorder. We know, because they're open design, or they've told us that their design incorporates strategies to reduce safepoint bias, and therefore they should have a minimized effect by it. JProfile and your kit are commercial products, and we don't have access to their code, so we don't know if they've tried anything to reduce it, but it is assumed they do. And Perf is a Linux tool that supports Java profiling, and that will be at the machine level, so it shouldn't have too much problems. And to be clear, all the profiles we tested were CPU samplers and not instrumentation, or we used them in sampling mode. So, do Java's profilers have consistent self-position was our first research question. What we actually mean by that is we're interested in the precision of the profiler. Precision to us is how close the measurements are. Evaluating the accuracy of profilers is very hard, thanks in no small part to the JVM's non-determinism. It's impractical to know what the perfect profile would be, the exact amount of percentage that the method should have or doesn't. And therefore, we were more interested in how consistent the profilers were with reproducing a similar result from run to run. So we won't be focusing exactly on how correct the report is, but simply how close it is to the previous. The benchmark suite we're using is the RFastJet suite. We chose the suite since it contains relatively well-known benchmarks. They also encapsulate common program behaviors. There's 9 micro benchmarks and 4 slightly macro benchmarks. There's also the column for hot method execution, each iteration. These are methods that are executed during every iteration, and they have a high chance of being JIT compiled, which would mean that they have a good chance of turning up in the profiles. So what is actually an experiment? a run of 300 iterations for each benchmark. We then repeat that 30 times for each profiler. What this actually gives us is 30 runs of a profiler with itself, so we can compare a profiler for any given benchmark 30 times. We will also then take the mean of those 30 results and then use that for the cross comparison of the different profilers. Why did we do so many runs? The length and the number of the runs should help the program reach peak performance and have a stable behavior. Also, using the medium should help minimize the effect of the JVM's non-determinism for the cross comparison. We also think this is a very fair way of testing the profilers. In most common use cases with profilers, you would probably run it once on a benchmark and not for that many iterations, and then take that one result as the result. So what was our results? The first graph here is plotting the differences in percentage of runtime we found for all the methods for a given profiler across all the benchmarks. We took all the methods found by the profiler and calculated the differences in percentage of runtime from across the 30 results. What this effectively gives us is the margin of error for each method the profiler finds. So what are some of the conclusions we found from this graph? The average precision is quite good. No profiler seems to have a persistent problem with self-precision. We did find that there were that all of them reached at least a 15% difference with at least one method, and also we found some outliers which were quite far out, and we will now go to show actually how misleading these outliers can be. So this is the worst case we found. This is the Delta Blue benchmark, specifically for the Java Flight Recorder, but we found that all the profilers had a problem with Delta Blue benchmark. On the x-axis is the percentage of runtime, and the y is all the methods that were identified in the 30 runs, and it was the top 10 hottest methods, but obviously there's more because there was 30 runs. The red lines show each time a method was identified as the first hottest in at least one of the runs, and the error bars show the range of that percentage for that method. As you can see, there's 8 methods that were identified as first hottest in at least one of these runs. You can also see methods like plan has a very large range of 5% to 29%. This is very large. With this example, if you ran the profiler for just once and took just one of the profilers, that one profiler as the answer, you were going to be misled. There is a high probability that most of these are incorrect, and therefore one given run of the profiler will give you an incorrect profile and lead you to do an incorrect optimization choice and make the program worse. Second example is average case. While there is no change in the first hottest method, there are some methods with quite large ranges. And for example, if you were not able to optimize the first hottest method for whatever reason, picking the next important is going to be quite a challenge. You can see with get a recurse here that the range is really, really far. And you would have a problem choosing what method to optimize here. So how do the profilers compare to each other? This is a graph trying to compare all the different profilers for the first hottest. A 1 would mean that all 6 profilers found the same method, and a 6 obviously means that 6 profilers found 6 methods for the first hottest. We found that there was more disagreement than agreement. Delta Blue and Richards was the worst, with 5 methods found, which means only 2 of our profilers actually agreed with each other on what the most important method should be for that benchmark. 2 of the best benchmarks we've found was Permute and Mandelbrot, where all 6 profilers identified the same method. It must be noted, though, that these benchmarks consist of only really 2 methods, so it was actually quite easy for the profilers to agree on that one. We did the same again, but instead of doing the first hottest, we did the top 5. So what were all the methods found in the top 5 across our 6 profilers? It's much worse. Delta Blue, for example, has 28 methods were identified between our 6 profilers for the top 5. And none of the profilers were below actual average. So our conclusion from this is that if you were attempting to collect accurate and precise profiler data by using multiple profilers, you may just end up with more confusion than actual answers. And also we can conclude that because there's such disagreement, at least one of these profilers or more must be incorrect, as there can't be multiple first hottest methods. Overhead, we plotted the medium overhead for all 14 benchmarks for the profilers. It's very good. They're all quite low, which is in agreement with most of their marketing as being low overhead profilers. We also found no correlation between overhead and self-precision. J profiler, which is the highest in overhead, was not also the highest or lowest in self-precision, and neither was honest profiler, the lowest in overhead, the best in precision, or the worst in precision. It must be noted, though, that J profiler has the worst overhead of 5%, and for some larger systems, 5% overhead might not be actually acceptable and could lead to some biased results. An observation, we also found an example of the compiler being non-deterministic. With this graph, we're plotting the percentage of runtime over the median runtime for that iteration. We found for this, which is async, or for the Queen's benchmark, that a change in percentage of runtime does occur. And we've noticed between the 108 milliseconds, there was a sudden change in the amount of percentage runtime. The top one, which is Queen's.getRow column, which is blue, goes up from 60% to 70% in runtime after a certain period of time. Our explanation for this bimodal distribution of points is there's an equal chance that the compiler makes one or another optimization choice, and is likely an example of the compiler being non-deterministic. Going forward in the summary, we have begun to investigate Java instrumentation as well, beyond the paper, with some early experimenting using Visual VM. We took the CD benchmark from ReFastJet, and we compared the profile before and after turning the compiler optimisations on and off. We also did this with the async profiler, which must be noted is a sampler, so that was a sample in the top one's instrumentation. The profile, as you can see with Visual VM, remains mostly unchanged whether the optimisations are on or off, which is actually incorrect. You would expect that if the compiler is optimizing, that there will be a change in what methods are the hottest, and at least the percentage. And we can confirm this with async clearly has a big change in what methods are important and what are not when the compiler goes from optimized to unoptimized. Our conclusions from this is presence of probes caused the program to be de-optimized. This is a very, very similar observation made in the paper, The Observer Effect of Profiling on Dynamic Java, where they counted the amount of inlining and found that it was the presence of instrumentation meant that inlining remained unchanged. So to summarize, the good, we found that the average precision of our 6 Java profiles was quite good. We found with our 14 benchmarks that only one had caused problems with self-position for our profilers, and we found that the average overhead for all of our 6 profilers is low. The bad, we did find cases where profilers can change its reports significantly from run to run, leading to misleading profiles. We found on average that profilers are in more disagreement with each other than agreement, and therefore at least some of them must be inaccurate. And finally, the reduction of safepoint bias has not fixed the problem with Java profilers' inaccuracy, and therefore profilers should still not be trusted to be correct. Thank you. That is the end of the presentation.
So we have time for a couple of questions. So just one quick observation first, so one of the original developers of Valgrind, Julian Seward, works on our team at Mozilla and is constantly in a fruitless quest to convince people that actually it's Valgrind, named after the entrance to Valhalla, not Valgrind. And he's never been successful inside Mozilla either, but I just thought I'd mention it. The second question I had was, to what extent are you confident that, especially in cases where there's a specific benchmark where profilers see a bunch of different hot functions, that it is in fact a problem with the profiler and not just that this benchmark itself, they are accurately reflecting the reality of differences? And in particular, I'm wondering about inlining decisions and whether that would have a significant impact in this case.
Yeah, we think it's going to be program specific why they're disagreeing. We did afterwards quickly do the exact same thing, but we used the DiCapo benchmark suite, and we found that there was also another benchmark in there that had real problems with self-precision with our profilers. But yeah, we think it is program specific, and it could be that these programs contain something that profilers are all making assumptions on, which is causing them to make problems.
So is it possible that the actual ground truth answer is that if you had a magical perfect profiler, from run to run of Delta Blue, different functions would show up, and the profilers are accurately reporting a non-determinacy in Delta Blue itself? Have you ruled that out?
No, my answer to that is I'm not going to claim that they're perfect or they're not imperfect, but clearly there is something that is causing profilers to have a problem, whether that be with the program or with the profilers itself.
Yeah, there's a problem there. I'm just unsure, questioning how we can determine which bucket it's in.
Was the sampling frequency modifiable for the 6 profilers?
Yes, and we kept them all exactly at the same frequency.
Okay, because I thought if you have different sampling frequencies, that probably would see something different.
You'll see something different, but no, we kept all the profilers at the same, and it was 10, I think it was 10 microseconds or milliseconds, I can't quite remember, but yes, all of them were the same and constant.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that info.
Going to ask you a question, if I may just follow up on that. Did you try varying the actual sampling frequencies on all the benchmarks, and did that have any effect on trying to?
We did try that with one profiler, but then used a very large variety of sampling frequencies, and we didn't notice anything different. When the sampling frequency was 1 second and the benchmark only ran for 10 seconds, we noticed that the profiler was terrible, the profile was terrible, but once we actually got to a certain point, it stayed pretty consistent regardless of the frequency.
All right, let's thank the speaker again.